Hi, my name is Tashi, and you're watching Beauty in the Bar. Today, I wanted to start off the How to Get into Law School series. I'm going to go through several parts of law school applications to give you some best practices for how to apply to and get into the law school of your choice. I applied to several law schools and I was admitted into all of the law schools to which I applied. I ultimately chose Yale, but was also admitted to Harvard, Stanford, Columbia, NYU, USC, UCLA, Howard, and that University of Chicago. And I think that might have been all the schools that I applied to. So I came from a background where there weren't any attorneys in my immediate family or in my extended family here in Los Angeles, which is where I'm from. I think maybe I had a cousin who was just starting out as an attorney in Alabama, which is, where my family is originally from. But I really didn't have a lot of those influences around me or really anyone around me from my family and the people that I grew up with that knew what you're supposed to do to try to get into law school. And I kind of figured it out from doing a lot of online research and doing a lot of the work myself. And I always thought that it would be a lot easier if someone had laid it out for me in the way that I sort of found it myself. And I didn't have to obsess the way that I did and really kind of dig down to figure it out. But I'm going to try to make that series for you to the best of my ability. And I'm starting off today with the LSAT, which I'm going to give you the, why, when, where, and how of studying for the LSAT. So here we go. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is why you want to study for the LSAT and why you want to make sure that this is a part of your application that you're preparing very carefully for. And that is because it is a huge percentage of what a school will look to determine whether you should be admitted. If I had to give it a numerical percentage from the things that I've read, it seems like it's about 60% of your application. I think it really depends on the school and it really depends on the individual student, but it is very important. This and your GPA are going to be the main things that schools are going to look at. And that's in part because these numbers affect their ranking on U.S. News and World Report, and therefore the prestige of the school and the amount of money they're able to get from alumni and donations, and the amount of students and quality of students that will apply there, the quality of professors that will want to teach there. So that ranking really does affect a lot of things, and these numbers are two of the many factors that go into that ranking that the admissions office can affect. So the LSAT and your GPA are very important to schools. The test goes up to a 180 in score. It's very, very rare that somebody gets a 180. Typically, the top performing students will get between 170 and 180, but you don't have to get between 170 and 180 to get into some of these schools. They have their average LSATs posted on their websites, so you will be able to see that there are some people that are getting below that, there are some people that are getting above that, and that just means that other pieces of their application are punching a little bit harder and making up for potentially some of the things that are a little bit weaker. So if their LSAT score is weaker, maybe their GPA is really high and they have a really killer personal statement, or they've done some sort of really awesome volunteer work, started an organization, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, that's going to be why you want to focus on the LSAT. It's going to be a metric that really allows them to compare various students without having too many subjective factors involved. Moving on to when to study for the LSAT. So you want to start studying as early as possible. I think I studied for the LSAT for about a year. And, when I spoke to some of the other students at my college and undergrad, they thought that was a very long time. But when I spoke to students who went to some of these top law schools and, students in my class at Yale, that was pretty standard. Many people have been studying for this test for multiple years, for a year. This is something that people who are more in the know really start on very, very early and decide on very, very early. This doesn't mean that if you're a senior in college or you're a junior in college right now that you can't study for a shorter period of time and do well. And it also doesn't mean that you need to apply right now. So if you do need that extra time to study, just keep in mind that many people don't start law school straight out of college. They take a year or two and try different things, which I would really encourage. I went straight through, and I think the people who did not go straight through and took the time to do a particular job that they were interested in got a better sense of what they wanted to do in the law and whether they wanted to be an attorney at all than some of us who sort of floated straight through. So I would just say you want to start as early as possible. What does that mean? I think you want to take the test by June of the year in which you're applying. The reason that you want to take the test in June is because you want to be able to retake the test in September and October should you need to, September or October, so that you can then apply before Thanksgiving-ish of the year that in which you're applying. From what I've seen and heard, that is going to be your best strategy for getting into schools that have rolling admissions. The earlier you get in, the better chance you're going to have of being admitted. On that note, I think we should talk for 1 second about whether or not you should retake an exam if you, feel that you want or can get a higher score. I think some people believe that, they should just take the exam over again because they get a score that they don't like. And I can totally understand that. We all want to do our best and we all, feel nervous about getting a score that doesn't meet the average or above the average of the schools to which we would like to be admitted. But many schools will average the scores that you receive, and many schools will, take the higher score. Many schools will just look at all the scores and they won't take a particular average. So depending on the school that you want to get into, retaking the exam and potentially doing worse can actually hurt your chances. I think you should only retake the exam if you think for some particular reason that you have a better chance of doing well on the exam than you had when you previously took it. That would mean if you took it in a place that was surprisingly noisy or something strange happened that distracted you from the exam, if you had a tragedy happen to you shortly before the exam that affected your emotional state, if you did really poorly on the section that you normally do really, really well on. For instance, if logic games is a section that you typically kill, but there was one particular game that for some reason was a little bit strange or you just couldn't figure out, that might be a reason to retake the exam. Or if you've taken some additional time to study and you're consistently doing practice tests and seeing that your score is higher than what it was, significantly higher, because you are going to probably do a little bit worse in the actual performance than your practice test because it's more of a high pressure situation. So for some people that does affect them. But if you were receiving, say, a 145 and now your practice tests are all 155 3 months later or 6 months later, that might be a reason to retake the exam. So you should just think very carefully about that, but I would not recommend just retaking the exam to retake it. I would be very thoughtful about that. I personally did retake my exam and it didn't feel as good or feel as though I did as well as my first exam, so I canceled it. And you do have about 30 days after the exam to cancel it, but you will never know what the score was. So for all I know, that score could have been, a perfect 180, and I would never know. I will never know what I got on that exam. So next thing I'm going to talk about is how you can study for the exam. The best thing you can do is take a prep course. And I remember in high school, I had some, other students and friends who were taking SAT prep courses. And I thought that was so strange because I didn't understand how you could take a class to teach you how to take a test. Now, after taking my LSAT prep course, I see that they were giving themselves a huge leg up. And that's just because tests are very specific, and sometimes just practicing the way that you can do the exam increases your score, especially on things like the logic game section, where, there are common logic games that are given across different years and across different exams. Practicing the different methods of how to attack the different questions can be incredibly helpful. Many people's score increases as much as 15 points, or even more if you talk to Kaplan, because they've taken a prep course and taken a little bit more time to study. So it's definitely important to take a prep course. Kaplan tends to be the standard, but there are also other courses that are very good. Blueprint is very good. There are a bunch out there, but I took Kaplan, and I think that they tend to be kind of the industry standard. Now, I have to mention that these courses can be very, very expensive, or what I would consider to be very expensive, and not everybody can afford to take one of these prep courses. You should keep in mind that there are scholarships for LSAT prep courses out there that you can apply to, so that someone else will pay for your exam. And some schools have particular programs, especially honors programs, that will pay for your exam. For instance, I went to Howard University, and our College of Arts and Sciences honors program at that time would pay for your LSAT prep course. You put down a $50 down payment, and they would pay for the rest of the course, which was a huge amount, and really was the main reason that I was able to take that prep course and not think too much about it. Because again, coming from the background I came from, I didn't understand how helpful it was going to be. So I don't know if I would have, gone to the lengths to pay for it myself. I probably would have at that time. I think I had figured out that it was, pretty necessary for me, but you just never know. So you should really look into ways that you can either save or get a scholarship, or, talk to your school, because sometimes even if you don't have the money right then out of pocket, you can figure it out. The next thing that I'll say is, if you really, really just cannot take the prep course, the best thing to do is to get practice tests, get old exams, and take those. The absolute best prep that I had over the course of the year that I was studying was repetition, just taking test after test after test, going over the answers very carefully, figuring out what I was doing wrong, figuring out the types of questions that were more difficult for me. And sometimes that can even help you sort of game the system, because if you know that you don't do too well on a certain type of logic game or a certain type of logical reasoning question, and it's very hard for you, you can skip over that question to other questions that you tend to get right, so that you can rack up points when, the timer is really getting down to the wire. So the final thing I want to talk about is where to take the exam. This wasn't something that I thought too much about, but, where you take the exam can really have an effect on how well you do. You want to be in a place where you're comfortable. So if there's a law school nearby that, is easy to get to, so when you wake up that morning, you're not doing a whole bunch of traveling, you're not stressed out, that's good. It's also good if you go in and, you can sit down in the place that you're going to be really taking the exam and take your practice test, because you just want to mitigate as much of the nerves as possible. And being in a new environment is part of the nervousness. It feels different. Whereas if you were to take the exam in a normal classroom that you're in all the time, you're probably going to feel a little bit more comfortable. So if you can go and practice test in a particular room in a particular law school where the test is going to be given, you're going to want to do that. Scope out the locations, do a little bit of online research, because often people will talk about what different environments are like. For instance, one school's classroom might be very noisy. There might be construction going on outside at that time, and there might be something that's a little bit more difficult to block out. Often people complain that certain schools don't have desks that are big enough to spread out all of your materials, so it makes it difficult because you're doing a little bit more juggling as you're taking the exam. These are all things that are going to be very minor in comparison to how prepared you are for the test. But, if it makes a difference between, one or two questions, why not try to give yourself the best advantage? So that's all the tips and recommendations I have as far as acing your LSAT. If you have any questions, to follow up to this, please leave them down below and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. And I'll see you next time. I will go on to talk about personal statements, your GPA, and many other, pieces of the application and of preparing. So, yeah, stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.